This morning in Las Vegas, we got our first real look at what the 2019 Aero package might look like. Let's talk about what we saw. How's it going, everybody? My name is Eric and welcome to Out of the Groove. I know I've been uploading a lot lately, but there's just been a lot of NASCAR news. These weeks leading up to the Daytona 500's always filled with new updates, so yeah, alas, here's my face yet again. The reason for today's episode is because earlier this morning, the NASCAR Cup Series tested at Las Vegas Motor Speedway as part of a Goodyear tire test. 14 drivers and teams participated, and while, yeah, sure, they were looking at tire wear and all that type of stuff, the big thing that fans were interested in was what this new intermediate Aero package was going to look like in action. The whole morning consisted primarily of a lot of single car runs, drivers just out there getting a feel for that kind of stuff. But then later in the day, NASCAR designated a specific 25-lap run in which all 14 cars were on track together, many of them kind of in a group in a small pack of sorts. I can't show you guys the full clips, but here's a couple little snippets of what we saw. Throughout the run, drivers really weren't able to get away from each other. At one point, the top two were kind of spaced out, maybe a half a second ahead of the rest of the pack, but they were quickly reeled back in. Drafting came into play, Aero came into play, all that type of stuff, all the things we kind of knew, kind of expected coming in. Remember the specifics of this Aero package. There's an 8-inch rear spoiler, which is a lot bigger than what we've seen the last couple of years. Aero ducts in the front of the car, a larger splitter with about a 2-inch overhang, and then the biggest thing is a tapered spacer in the engine, reducing horsepower from about 750 last year down to 550 this year. Overall, these changes have created a very high downforce type of Aero package. What I want to do in this video is I kind of just want to talk about some observations I made, point out a few details here and there as far as lap times and stuff are concerned, and then I want to look at what a handful of the drivers had to say. After the session, I was frantically looking around for quotes from drivers, found a few pretty interesting ones, so we're going to look at those as well. One thing I saw Jeff Gluck note on Twitter, and then I saw a lot of people kind of run with it, is the observation that the Cup Series cars are actually running a couple tenths slower than the Xfinity cars when they were all doing single car runs. A lot of people seem to be outraged by this. How can the Cup cars be slower than the Xfinity cars? Oh my goodness. The thing is, we've known this for a while. We knew when they announced this package that the Cup cars were going to have slightly lower horsepower than the Xfinity cars, obviously with the huge rear spoiler. When you're in a single car, when you're making single car runs, the Cup cars, no way they're going to run faster. We didn't get exact lap times when they were in the draft from this session, but Noah Gragson, after all of it was said and done, did say that he thinks the Cup cars will be faster than the Xfinity cars once we start racing in 2019. That's not a big note, but I guess it is something worth mentioning. I mean, they do have lower horsepower and a bigger rear spoiler. That's going to result in slightly lower speeds. Now, the one thing I heard from several drivers as well as reporters, and also something I observed myself watching the 25-lap session, is that this Cup Series package looks very similar to the Truck Series package we've seen the last few years. One thing that everyone saw was, the first few laps, cars could kind of run flat out. Really didn't have to lift that much, especially not at a big track like Las Vegas with 24-degree banking, recently repaved, so a smooth surface. First few laps, even in the draft, you didn't have to lift that much. You could run pretty much flat out. But then as you started to put a few laps on the tires, as the run went on, cars started lifting more, and that's when you saw the pack kind of get spread out a little bit more, similar to what we see, in truck races these days. After the session was over, in fact, Kyle Busch directly compared it to the Truck Series, especially when you're running back in around a bunch of other cars. So I thought that was interesting. That's one thing I was really looking hard at is, how long could these drivers stay so close together, kind of in a draft, in a pack with each other? And the answer was they could stay in a pretty good pack for about 10 to 12 laps, and then after that, you started to see pockets form. Leaders would get away, the faster cars would get away. During the session, you saw quickly how Kyle Busch, Brad Keselowski, Jimmy Johnson, Clint Bowyer were able to drive away from everybody else because those are the best teams, those are the best drivers in this session. Austin Dillon, Ryan Newman, Paul Menard, the mid-pack guys were kind of stuck around 6th, 7th, 8th in line. Remember, it was 14 cars on track. And you really started to see that take form as the run went on. Early on, Ryan Newman was up in the top 3, running up there with Kyle Busch, Brad Keselowski, but then he faded. Same with Matt DiBenedetto early in the practice session. He was up in the top 5, running with Keselowski, with Johnson. He faded. Now, the other big thing I was watching in this practice session was how could drivers pass? Could they pass each other on their own? As in, without drafting help. Could you get a run on somebody, move low, move high, and clear them without needing a push from behind? And that's one thing I will say I was very pleased about after watching this practice session. The racing, the passing from about 3rd, 4th place on back was pretty impressive. You had comers, you had goers. At one point, Kyle Busch intentionally dropped back to about 8th in line, and within a few laps, he was back up in the top 2 or 3. He was able to make moves. You saw that with a lot of drivers. It wasn't always easy. It definitely helped if you had a drafting partner at times. That definitely made it easier, but I saw on multiple occasions drivers able to complete passes on the bottom or on the high side completely on their own, more or less. That's another thing I found interesting. I'm sure this will change as we go to different intermediate tracks, but at Las Vegas it seemed, as the run went on, after about 5-10 laps, the outside lane seemed to be more effective for passing than the bottom lane. I just noticed that, thought that was interesting. Momentum was key. It almost looked like Auto Club or Michigan kind of, condensed into a Las Vegas racetrack. But that's one thing that I'm very optimistic about after watching this practice session. Again, there were only 14 cars, really only about 9 or 10 in that front pack, but I expect once we get 40 cars on the track and the season actually starts, I think the racing from 5th to about 30th is going to be as good as we've ever seen it at these intermediate tracks. I think there's going to be a lot of comers and goers, lots of jostling for position. You'll have a guy get past and then pass him right back the very next lap. 5th through 30th is going to be some of the best racing we've ever seen at intermediate tracks. Mark my words. I think from what I saw in this package here, from what I saw in the All-Star race last year, which was similar to what we're running now, mark my words, I think that's guaranteed. Now the last thing I was really looking at in this practice session is the one thing I haven't talked about yet. How hard would it be to pass the leader? In the All-Star race last year, which ran a variation of this package, a similar package in a sense, it was very hard to pass the leader. When Kevin Harvick got out front in that race, it was extremely hard to pass him under green. Now last season, Kevin Harvick was dominant. That was in the middle of his dominant streak. He probably had the best car, but that being said, it shouldn't be impossible to pass a guy like that. So that was what I was looking for in this practice session. Early on, Brad Keselowski jumped out and led for a little while. Looked like, there's people still able to stay with him, stay on his bumper, but nobody was really making a move on him until Kyle Busch got up into the top 3, top 2. When Kyle Busch got to second place, about a lap after he got to second place, he dove to the inside on Brad Keselowski. And as you can see here, I'll show this quickly. The camera didn't really show it because the cameraman was, who knows what he was doing. But we see Kyle Busch make the move right there, and then when they cut back a half a lap later, Kyle Busch has moved clear to the race lead. So we can assume he was able to make the pass on his own. And so while after looking at this practice session, I still think clean air is going to be important. I think if you can manage to stay in that top 2, top 3, it's going to be hard to pass you. It's going to be hard to get by those leaders. But I definitely am a little more optimistic after watching that test. Kyle Busch is maybe the best driver at this test session, maybe in the best car at this test session, and at least he was able to get by the leader. Again, it was only a 25-lap run with only like 10 cars in the lead pack, so I didn't expect to see 7 or 8 lead changes, but it was nice at least that the leader couldn't get away, and it seemed when the leader had a really fast car behind him like Kyle Busch was, it seemed like it was definitely possible for Kyle Busch to make the pass more or less on his own. So that's that makes me optimistic. That's something that we can build on. That's still, I think, after all this whole test session, that's the only thing that I think NASCAR really could improve in this package. The racing from 5th to 30th I think is going to be fantastic, but up in that top 5, that top 3, I think if NASCAR could find a way to make it a little easier to pass the leader, make it so clean air isn't so important and so beneficial, I think we'd have something that really, really could work. Now, I know there's probably a decent amount of you that disagree with me on that. A lot of people, I think, still aren't fully warmed up to the idea of this becoming the norm in NASCAR. And I completely understand that. I'll address that at the end of this video. Before I do that, I want to talk about a couple quotes that came from drivers after this session. One I read from Clint Boyer. He said, "It's definitely different. It's going to take time. The cars seemed like they handled well. Obviously, a lot of wide open throttle time. Things we knew coming in." Clint Boyer basically just summed up the package perfectly right there. The cars are meant to handle a little bit better. They're easier to handle. The cars aren't on edge constantly, It's supposed to put it back in the driver's hands. But that being said, he does point out that there's a lot more on throttle time. There's not really a whole lot of lifting going on, especially in a short run like this. So he kind of highlights the pros and the cons, I think, of this package just in that short quote. Kyle Busch has been more critical of this package ever since it was introduced at the All-Star race. Here's what he had to say. "We've taken the driver skill away from the drivers in this package. Anyone can go out there and run wide open. You, the media, can probably do it. It's going to be a lot more of a mental game, a lot more of a chess match. Thinking how you're going to make moves, how daring you'll be." Now, I agree with Kyle Busch here as well, and I think a lot of fans will. By making the cars more stable, easier to drive, especially as far as the single car runs are concerned, it is taking some of the skill away from drivers, something that Kyle Busch excels at. Kyle Busch is known for being able to handle an out-of-control race car better than most, so I can understand why he would be critical of this change. That being said, I still take exception to the extremeness of this statement. The idea that it takes all driver skill away, the idea that anybody can drive these cars, that's just not true, and I don't appreciate him saying that. A lot of people are saying that this package makes the cars just easier to drive, and when we're talking about just single car runs, I completely agree. Like I said earlier, the cars aren't borderline out of control heading into the corner like they sometimes used to be, so I understand that. It's not like that anymore. But I would argue it's not necessarily easier to drive these cars, it's just different. With this new package, cars are going to be a lot closer together. Drivers are going to have to react more quickly to big runs, more aggressive bump drafting and pushing, things that, with the exception of like Daytona and Talladega, they never really had to worry about before. And at the end of the day, there are still very few people in the world that can drive these race cars at 190 miles an hour for 3 to 4 hours, inches away from other competitors, without losing focus and causing a wreck or having an issue. That's still a very refined skill that not a lot of people have. So for Kyle Busch to say that anybody can drive these cars, I just feel like that's disrespectful to himself. I think that's disrespectful for a lot of these other competitors. So that's basically my reaction to this package. We didn't really see anything in this test that we didn't really already know or already expect. Again, once we get a full 40 car field out there, and then of course once we go to different tracks, Las Vegas is a fairly recently repaved track. It's a smooth surface, it's gonna be very different than say Atlanta or Auto Club or Michigan. At the end of the day, from what I saw this morning, I'm very optimistic for what this Aero package is gonna do at the cookie cutter racetracks this year. People talk all the time about how Kentucky races are unwatchable, how current Texas races are unwatchable, how most Las Vegas races are unwatchable. Those 3 tracks, I think, are gonna be much more fun to watch this year. When we go to a track with a rough surface like Atlanta, you're gonna see more off throttle time. I don't think the change is going to be as noticeable as it is at other tracks. Racing will still probably be pretty good there. Auto Club, same thing. And also keep in mind that this package isn't going to affect the racing at short tracks or road courses. Those are going to still be just as fun, just as drivable as ever. Really, the only track that I think this Aero package might hurt the racing at is Chicagoland. Maybe Kansas. I'll throw Kansas in there. Maybe it hurts Kansas a little bit. Because the last couple years, those 2 tracks have been really fun. Multi-groove racing, a lot of runs, a lot of momentum. Cars are hard to drive, so the best drivers rise to the top. Chicagoland and Kansas have been great the last couple years. But in my opinion, those are the only 2 racetracks that are going to suffer as a result of this Aero package. Texas Motor Speedway, those races are unwatchable the last couple of years. Las Vegas, same thing. Kentucky, same thing. This Aero package is going to make those races more exciting. I think there's a lot of good things that can come out of this new package. For one, with the lower horsepower, a lot of new manufacturers are showing interest in NASCAR. Rick Hendrick just said earlier this week that he thinks there's a good chance new manufacturers could come into the sport in the next couple of years because now that the engines are lower horsepower, they're more cost efficient to build, cost effective, whatever the word is. I've said this before, but what are the most popular races on the NASCAR schedule every year? The most watched, most highly attended? Which races are they? Daytona, both of their races, and Talladega, both of their races. And everybody knows that the winner of the Daytona races or Talladega races aren't necessarily the best driver in the field, but those are the most popular races on the schedule every single year. And that's because, I'll use this word again, those races are a spectacle. Seeing cars 2 wide, 3 wide, bump drafting, close together, high speeds like that is something no other motorsport can replicate. NASCAR is the only sport that creates that type of spectacle. So I understand what a lot of naysayers are going to say. It's not pure racing anymore. They're taking it out of the driver's hands, or driver skill isn't showing as much. And I understand all those criticisms, and I completely agree with you. But all I can say is, give this new package a chance. It's not going to be at every single race this year. I think it's going to make a lot of the races more entertaining than they've been in recent years. Honestly, I think it'll be a net positive for the sport going forward. Maybe I'm in the minority. Let me know down in the comments. If you've made it this far without leaving your hot take in the comments, I'm impressed. But anyway, I'd let you guys know what I think. There's still more testing going on tomorrow, but I bet we're going to just see more of the same. They're not adding more cars to the draft, so it's probably going to look exactly like how it did earlier today. So that's all I've got. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Remember, you can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, if you want to talk about more racing, continue the conversation over there. Check those out in the description. Also, P.O. Box down there if you want to send me some cool NASCAR stuff. I'll show it off and shout you out in a future episode. Also, t-shirts, if you want an Out of the Groove t-shirt, that's also down there. And then, of course, big thank you to my Patreon supporters. Thank you, Michael Harrison at GWiz of the Stars, SelfishGifts.com, Mentally Defective, Cameron James Ticemore, John Koblenz, Tim Shingen, Jason R. Long, iFantasyRace.com, and the rest of these amazing supporters. Thank you all for helping this show continue to grow into 2019. If you also want to become a supporter of the show, check out that top link in the description. Really appreciate the support, y'all. It helps me out a ton. A lot of exciting things planned for the show going forward. I'll take probably a day or two off here to kind of regroup, but it's been fun. This week's been really fun making videos. Thanks everyone for watching. See you guys again real soon. Daytona is just around the corner. What, like a week and a half till the Clash? Pretty exciting.